Let's take a look at another show that could be connected to Gravity Falls. Star vs. the Forces of Evil. Now, last video you guys commented a lot that Star is connected. It was the second most requested show after Rick and Morty. But how much evidence is there supporting this claim? Now, last video I talked about there being a Seuss in every dimension, and this applies to Star vs. the Forces of Evil as well. In the episode Starstruck, we can see a person who looks suspiciously like Seuss. Now, a dude in a green shirt isn't enough to convince me that this is Seuss, but it is reinforced by a bunch of familiar characters. In the same episode, we can see the tourists from Gravity Falls are here. Does this mean that this is the same version of Earth that Gravity Falls takes place on? Now, while we are on the topic of Gravity Falls characters appearing in Star, I want to talk about this picture. It shows Mabel and Dipper at Star's school, but this image is not real. It's a very widespread hoax. I thought I'd better explain this because people who think it is real will think that I missed it. But it is fake, so don't believe everything you hear on the internet. Except me, of course. You can trust me on this one. But anyway, back on topic. Another piece of evidence that could point to Star's version of Earth being the same as Gravity Falls is this sticker. In Marco's locker, we can see a sticker for several times. The band that was a bunch of clones in Gravity Falls. Apparently, Marco is a fan. Our next connection between shows takes place in the Star episode Bon Bon the Birthday Clown. As Bon Bon the Clown is slowly passing away in hospital, we can see what appears to be the Mystery Shack before it becomes the Mystery Shack, but it also could just be a random house that looked quite similar. But anyway, our next Easter egg is one you're probably very familiar with at this point. It's our mandatory Bill Cipher appearance. He can be seen in the corner of Jackie's room as a poster. Now, in Star vs. the Forces of Evil, there are a bunch of triangles with eyes appearing throughout the show, like this one, but I'm not going to go through all of them since I mentioned last video that if it has no hat, it's not Bill. But this appearance here is definitely Bill as we can see by the hat. So yet again we see Bill's influence spreading across dimensions. And speaking of other dimensions, let's take a look at the Easter eggs that take place off Earth. In Star vs. the Forces of Evil, we see a dimension that is dedicated to being one big shopping dimension. It's called Quest Buy, and it pretty much has everything you could imagine for sale. This includes the gnomes from Gravity Falls, as we can see here. Now, our next interdimensional Easter egg appears on Star's home dimension, Muni. It's this strange creature right here. It's a cross between a pig and a goat. And now you may be thinking, how the hell does this relate to Gravity Falls? Well, in Gravity Falls, Mabel says she's good at matchmaking, using her pig Waddles and a goat as an example. I believe the pig goat is a reference to this match Mabel made. Now, I don't really see any way how this actually ties things together, since there's no way that Waddles and the goat had a child that got to Yumi, but it's still an interesting reference. Now, the next reference falls into the same category of not really tying things together, but still being interesting references. In Journal 3, on the page about cursed doors, we have this note, knock knock, who's there? The forces of evil. Now, I find this bit of evidence to be fairly weak, since it's just saying part of Star's name. And Star has another reference that feels very similar to this one. In the Magic Book of Spells, we have a spell that can delete gravity, which feels like it's referring to Gravity Falls. But again, this isn't very strong evidence. Now again, this next piece of evidence doesn't really tie things together very well, but it is interesting. There's this strange teapot on it, and it seems to appear in both shows. It appears here as a statue, and here in the Mindscape. But now that we have those smaller Easter eggs out of the way, I want to show you my favorite Easter egg. In Gravity Falls Weirdmageddon Part 2, we can see Mabel's fantasy world. It's a weird world full of colourful characters. Now, if you look closely, you may see someone who's familiar to you if you've seen Star vs. the Forces of Evil, and it's of course a pony head. But next to this pony head is a huge sentient star. Now, I think this literal star is supposed to be a parallel to Star Butterfly. This pair of characters is supposed to represent Star and Ponyhead. Now that's all I could find for the in-canon Easter eggs, and there isn't really too much to talk about outside of the canon. Now one of the only things I could find is that Alex Hirsch voice acts for this creepy little dude, Ben Fortino. I think that's how his name's pronounced, not really sure. He was the weird guy who locked Star and Marco in the photo booth in the episode Booth Buddies. And a bonus little fact that I found is that Brad Breek, I think that's how his name is pronounced, created the theme for Gravity Falls and Star vs. the Forces of Evil. Now, for my final thoughts on Star vs. the Forces of Evil, being in this connected cartoon multiverse. Compared to Rick and Morty, Gravity Falls, Amphibia, and Owl House, I think this is the least likely to be connected. I think it has the weakest connections, and some things just don't feel like they line up. For example, the ending of Star vs. the Forces of Evil has Muni and Earth merging into one dimension. This just has too much of an impact for the other shows if it is connected. Amphibia had the invasion of Earth, which could have been a big deal, but we do get a time jump into the future where people think it was a hoax, and it was isolated to one city, but Star's ending can't just be ignored. I also feel that the multiverse works different as well in Star. Every dimension is connected through magic wells, and just feels different from the Rick and Morty styled multiverse. Now, none of this is to say that I dislike the show or it's bad or something. I just want to be honest with my theory, and I just feel that Star has the weakest connection. But let's move on, shall we? Now, since my last video, a bunch of new information has come out relating to Amphibia and Owl House, and I would also like to take this time to address some previously unmentioned things. Now, since my last video, the Owl House Season 2 final aired, and holy moly, does it have a huge connection to Amphibia. We have this shot of Luce's mum and V in the kitchen, and we can see this iPad with an article about a girl being lost in a frogland. The article straight up has a picture of Anne Boonchoi. I love this Easter egg. It's really upfront and not hidden at all. I find this to be a really compelling piece of evidence, and it feels even more connected with Amphibia, since Amphibia and the Owl House were airing together, with Amphibia's last episode airing on May 14th, 2022, and Owl House's airing on May 28th, 2022. Having this article appear right after Amphibia's conclusion makes this feel like the events in Amphibia just happened in Owl House. This, combined with everything I said in the other video, makes me strongly believe they are connected. Now, something I didn't talk about in my last video is who was the author of Dr. P's Extraordinary Guide to Magic and Mystery. Now, the reason I didn't initially talk about it in the last video was because I was pretty sure I knew who wrote it. But with Amphibia concluded, we don't exactly get a clear answer, so I proposed cases for two candidates. Now, the two suspected candidates for Dr. P is either Stanford Pines or Leaf Planter. Now, let's look at why Stanford could be Dr. P. Now, first is that his last name is Pines, so that's what the P would stand for. 2. When we see Marcy open Dr. P's Extraordinary Guide to Magic and Mystery, we can see a page with Bill's cipher on it, and Stanford is probably the best qualified to be writing about Bill. Dr. P's guide seems to know a bit about interdimensional travel since it has the Calamity Box in it. Stanford has plenty of experience traveling dimensions, and Stanford is the creator of the journals in Gravity Falls, so writing Dr. P's guide seems like it falls in his territory. Now, side note, Dipper could also be a good candidate. He has lots of experience with Bill, as well as also being part of the Pines family, so he still fits under the P. And there is the official Gravity Falls book called Dipper and Mabel's Guide to Mystery and Fun. It's a guide written by Dipper and Mabel, but if we remove Mabel's stuff, it becomes Dipper's Guide to Mystery. This sounds fairly similar to Dr. P's Extraordinary Guide to Magic and Mystery. Maybe Dipper's book is the first attempt at making a journal that would become Dr. P's guide. Now, the other speculated person for Dr. P is Leaf Planter. The P would obviously stand for Planter. Dr. P has knowledge of the music box, which we know Leaf has. We also know Leaf has made a similar journal that she left for her family as a warning about the Calamity Box's power. I also feel that Leaf being Dr. P fits into Amphibia's story better. As she leaves the Calamity Box on Earth, she could have also left this guide, and then it feels like it ties the prophecy and Amphibia together. Since she glimpses the future, it would mean her actions lead the prophesized heroes to Amphibia to stop the destruction she saw. But we don't have solid proof for either, so for now it's all just speculation. Now, I didn't bring up this next point in my last video because I thought it might be too much of a stretch. It also relies on you believing other theories, so I didn't think it was worth mentioning. But the comments of the last video have proved me wrong, so here we go. I'll be discussing the theory that King is a reincarnated version of Bill. Now, I want to give some of the credit for this theory to the YouTube channel Roundtable. I'll leave a link in the description. So, let's begin. Now, first, let's state the obvious. At the end of Gravity Falls, Bill Cipher dies. Well, as I'm sure a lot of Gravity Falls fans have noticed, that may not be the case. Now, here's Bill's death scene.
I'll give you anything! Money, fame, riches, infinite power, your own galaxy, please! No! What's happening to me? The neurons can be got otherwise! The game's broken up! It's not enough! Please! I won't stay in! Stanley!
Now, you may notice he was speaking in reverse. Here's what he said. He says AXOLOTL, my time has come to burn. I invoke the ancient power so I may return. Now at the beginning he spells out Axolotl. It sounds like he's asking an axolotl to save him from death. Now, we haven't seen an axolotl in the actual show, but we have sort of seen one in the Gravity Falls Choose Your Own Adventure book, The Curse of the Pirate's Treasure. Now, Alex Hirsch has tweeted, this book is not canon, but it does have one big canon secret. Now, you may have noticed I said sort of seen an axolotl in this book. That's because it's technically not in the book. One of the Choose Your Own Adventure endings leaves us with a code that leads us to a website that has a secret page in it. And this is where we see the axolotl. The axolotl is some sort of cosmic creature. It allows Dipper and Mabel to ask it a question. Dipper asks what it knows about Bill. The axolotl responds with this poem: 60 degrees that come and freeze, watches from within birch trees, saw his own dimension burn, misses home and can't return, says he's happy, he's a liar, blame the arson for the fire. If he wants to shirk the blame, he'll have to invoke my name. One way to absolve his crime, a different form, a different time. Now there's a lot to unpack here. Now, the first two lines are just describing Bill. 60 degrees that come in freeze is just describing a triangle, and the line watches from within birch trees refers to how Bill observes people through trees. Now, our next line is where it gets a bit more interesting. Saw his own dimension burn, misses home and can't return, says he's happy, he's a liar, blame the arson for the fire. Now, this part talks about how Bill's dimension was destroyed, and he can't return to it. Now, it says blame the arson for the fire. Now, we know this is Bill based on this clip.
Think those chains are tight? Imagine living in the second dimension. Flat minds in a flat world with flat dreams. I liberated my dimension, Stanford, and I'm here to liberate yours.
Bill says he liberated his dimension while we see a planet burning in his eye, so I think it's fairly safe to assume that Bill is guilty for destroying his home dimension. Now, the last part is the most important. If he wants to shirk the blame, he'll have to invoke my name. One way to absolve his crime, a different form, a different time. So what I got from this is to avoid the blame or punishment for destroying his dimension, he has to speak the axolotl's name, which we saw him do just before his death. Now the line one way to absolve his crime is important. It doesn't say resolve his crime or redeem. It says absolve, so he's being declared free of guilt or punishment. He's not being redeemed, but he is becoming guilt-free. And our last line, a different form, a different time. I think it's talking about Bill being reincarnated. He will return after his death in Gravity Falls, but not in the same form and in a different time. So I believe after Bill burned his home dimension, he has had a hidden sadness and guilt within that we don't see in the show, and to avoid this feeling of guilt, the Axolotl has given him a choice to become a new person, a person who wouldn't know of his crimes. It's a way for him to feel absolved of his crimes without having to redeem himself. Now, how do we know that the Axolotl is the one big lore secret? Well, for starters, the fact that it ties into Bill's death lines is a pretty good point. Also, in the Choose Your Own Adventure book, this part of the story seems to take place outside of the story. It seems to be in a place outside of space and time. So this is the perfect place for a canon piece of lore to exist in a non-canon story. And to reinforce this point that this is the canon part, it's not the only time we see the axolotl. Now we'll return back to my favorite source of information relating to Gravity Falls, the journal-free book. Now the official journal-free book you can buy takes place after Gravity Falls. After Weirdmageddon stopped and everything returned to normal, the journals returned as well. Stanford adds a new section about his time lost between dimensions into it. On his journey between dimensions, he meets a seven-eyed woman who he calls the Oracle. In the picture of the Oracle, we can see three axolotls. I believe the Oracle works for or is connected to the axolotl in some way. I believe this based on her actions. She seems to know everything about Ford and a lot about Bill, talking about how he destroyed his dimension. She seems to know a lot of things that the axolotl talked about in the previous book. She also assists Ford in his mission for defeating Bill. She gives him the metal plate that's in his brain to stop Bill entering his mind. I believe the axolotl wants Ford to beat Bill, so he guides him on the path to stopping him. I believe the axolotl wants Bill to be defeated, so he'll be forced to invoke his name. This would result in the end of Bill's reign, and a chance for him to start again. So if Bill is still alive, where is he? Well, I think this is where Outhouse comes into it. I think Bill reincarnated into King. Now, one obvious connection between Bill and King is his voice. Now, both are voiced by Alex Hirsch. That's not really a big deal. He voices lots of characters in cartoons. He has a very wide range in voices. Just look at these examples.
When there's no cops around, anything's legal.
Dude, it's me, Seuss. This is for the zombies.
Thanks.
And this is in case you see a pinata.
I will be haunted by my actions forever. Hoot hoot!
Well, This is gonna take a while. Good luck getting out of that death trap.
All these voices are very unique, but now compare Bill and King's voices. They are basically identical. Bill and King are important characters in their stories. It seems odd to give them both the same voice. I mean, just listen to some of these lines. They sound like they're from the same character.
Name's Bill, but you can call me your new lord and master for all of eternity. Your time has ended. Mine begins. All who stood in my way are gone. I declare myself despotic ruler of this land. Nothing can stop the Almighty.
Bill and King share similar character traits. They both want power, they both like to assert dominance over others, and they both seem to like making deals. But the most interesting trait that King has is his belief that he was once a mighty king. He has memories of being a powerful ruler, ruling over armies and minions. Could this be King remembering fragments of his life as Bill? We do get part of an explanation for this in Owl House. In the episode Echoes of the Past, we find out that King was found in this temple, guarded by a stone creature. There are carvings of King's race everywhere. They all depict them doing mighty things and ruling. This mixed with the stories that Ida told King is what caused King to have these fractured memories of being a mighty ruler. Then, in a later episode, Edge of the World, we discover that King is the last Titan. Titans were extremely powerful. The Boiling Isles is even built on the corpse of one. I still think there's room for these memories to relate to Bill. Now, even though we are given an explanation for why King remembers these things, I think they could still be partly true. King, by the end of the episode, is confused and is not sure what's real, and his origins are still confusing and vague. So maybe these feelings and memories are King remembering parts of his old life, as Bill, a powerful ruler. Maybe that's why it was easier for him to latch onto these ideas, since he feels he was a powerful being. Now, I think King being the last of the Titans fits in well with this. Since Bill was such a powerful being, it would make sense that if he was reincarnated, he would become a different powerful being. But there might be even more proof that King has remnants of memories of being Bill. Now, back in the episode Intruder, King's explaining demons to Luce. He makes this board of demons, and as you can see, Bill is hidden up in the top here. Now, if King was Bill and has fractured memories of his past, maybe he remembered the fact that Bill was a dream demon, so he put him on the demon board. Now, I may be overthinking this, but the Bill note is kind of tucked away behind the main banner, like King isn't quite sure how it fits in, and that's because it doesn't. It's not a demon from the Boiling Isles, it's a demon from his past. Now, in my opinion, this would fit the story nicely as well. Now, I hate to break it to you, but there isn't going to be more Gravity Falls, so leaving this Easter egg that Bill's still alive just makes a loose end that wouldn't be solved. But if Bill appeared in another show, it could be a conclusion for his story, and this would fulfill the Axolotl's poem. King is not a bad person. He is actually a very kind and caring person. So if Bill became king, this would be a way for him to absolve his crime. He hasn't been redeemed, but he has become a completely new person who is innocent. But anyway, what do you think? I think this is a wild claim, but I could honestly see this happening. And Owl House isn't over yet. Maybe there will be more connections pointing to Bill being king. I guess we'll just have to wait and find out. Now, I have two more things to cover, and they are straight up crossovers, official crossovers. Now, that's got to confirm it, right? Well, let's dive in. The first official crossover I could find was in Disney's Sidekick song. It's a crossover between Amphibia, Big City Greens, Owl House, Gravity Falls, The Ghost and Molly McGee, DuckTales, Phineas and Ferb, Rapunzel's Tangled Adventures, and Kim Possible. Now, does this mean that all these shows are connected? No, of course not. This music video crossover is filmed in a studio. Everything is staged. I don't think these are the canon versions of the characters, but rather are versions that know they are Disney characters who are playing themselves in Disney shows. But either way, this again shows how close these shows are. If they can literally have a crossover in a music video, then why can't their worlds overlap as well? Now this leads me to our last point. It's quite similar to the Sidekicks music video, but bigger. It's Disney's Chibiverse. It's a literal crossover show. It has all sorts of shows, including Owl House, Amphibia, Gravity Falls, and Star vs. the Forces of Evil. So that proves it, right? Well, not exactly. These aren't actually the same versions of characters from the shows. We know this based on the intro.
In a Disney laboratory, super duper confidential spot, where a bunch of crackpot scientists said, what the heck, we're trying this, and grabbed up every story that we got. They threw them all together in a mashup machine, produced a glowing orb about the size of a bean, slid it underneath a microscope and found a bunch bunch of cutesy characters just futzing around.
So the Chibiverse is its own canon, where Disney's created a tiny planet with all their shows mashed together. But even though this isn't canon, it's still crazy that this can even happen. It's just one more connection between these shows. This paired with everything else that I've mentioned makes a really compelling case. Now, to wrap this up, I would like to do a little tier list, sort of. I'll be ranking which shows I feel are the most strongly connected. Now, to start this off, I'm putting Gravity Falls in S tier because it has connections to every show I've mentioned. Now, in A tier, I'm putting Owl House and Amphibia. The reason I'm putting them up so high is because they have a three-way connection. Gravity Falls, Owl House, and Amphibia have connections going all ways, so it just feels very well connected. And they are all owned by Disney, so they can cross over. Now, in B tier, I'm going to be putting Rick and Morty. Even though it has some of the strongest links and connections to Gravity Falls, it's still owned by Adult Swim, so I can't ever see them crossing over properly. And last but not least, I'm putting Star vs. the Forces of Evil at the bottom. Even though there are links connecting them with Gravity Falls, they are just the weakest ones, and its world just feels very different and disconnected from all the other ones I've talked about. But with that, I think it's time to wrap up this video. Thanks to everyone who subscribed in my first part, it really means a lot. Let me know what other theories and shows you would like me to cover on the channel. And quick warning, this isn't my main content, I mostly do gaming, so subscribe at your own risk there, people. Thanks for bearing with me. Bye!